Chapter 411 Bad to Worse. Robert point of view. How did things go so wrong? Robert asked himself as he was once again watching the hammer of ice soar through the air. The first time was when it had been thrown high, to start a duel that was already a bad idea. Now, for the second time, he asked himself that question while watching it shoot across the area with the intent to kill. If Robert had thought the feat of strength from before was impressive, it was nothing compared to now. How high is his strength? 6,000? 7,000? That's theoretically impossible. The highest rarity class at H rank was common, rare at G rank, legendary at F rank, and mythic for E rank and D rank. Not to mention that no one had ever reported possessing a grade that high. Even if you took the highest known ratio of how many points per level were toward one stat, 33%, plus factored in both class and profession focusing on the same stat, which Robert knew wasn't the case, the theoretical maximum, with a level of 127 in class and 102 in profession, was around 4,400. Nowhere near the height required to perform the feats Robert was witnessing with his own eyes, and that was assuming 2 mythical classes and professions. What kind of stat-boosting skills does the man have? Rage is common enough, but that's only a 10% boost. Even upgrading it to rare is only 22.5%. Even if he has one of those stat derivative skills, that's only a 2-to-1 ratio of a lesser stat. Robert had done the math during the fight while he'd gotten battered by the man's monstrous strength firsthand. His newly upgraded body of copper was barely holding up, and that was something he hadn't thought possible by someone lower level than himself. Even with maximum density and rejection field helping, the blows still thundered down. The first helped his body weather the beating, while the second did its best to push the incoming hammer away from him as best as it could, blunting the blow. And still, his arms ached like they were getting fractured to pieces. His knuckles bled from punching his icy armor and defending against blows. His hands stung from the cold, constantly drawing mana to keep the frostbite at bay every time his skin touched the weapon. All of that ran through his mind as he watched the dangerous weapon home in on the running men. That, and the question he'd been asking himself. Where did it all go so wrong? Neither Ryan or Pierre looked back at the weapon hurtling toward them, and it wouldn't have mattered if they had. It was moving so fast that foreknowledge was useless. It was almost a mercy for one of them that he never got to see his death coming. Pierre was carrying a screaming Ryan as he clutched at his blacked stump of an arm, and it was he who had his body that was first in the line of fire. The rogue shielded Ryan from death one last time as the hammer landed spike first in his back. The spike drove through his spine and ribcage like his bones were made of paper. His heart was pulverized before he even knew what hit him. After the spike came the rest of the hammer, its force barely diminished. His upper chest exploded in blood, and what was left of his upper and lower halves were thrown from one another. The only part left above his waist was his head, and even that didn't come out unscathed. Not that it mattered. Dead was dead. He couldn't get any more dead. Robert wondered if even Vernon could have made anything out of what was left. He wasn't fond of the necromancer, but he was powerful, which said a lot about the state of the body. While Pierre may have fatally blocked the worst of it, he didn't have the resilience or fortitude to block all of it. It was too much force, and it didn't help that the weapon was charged with enough mana and lingering spirit that it danced with an inner glow. Ryan's right leg was pulverized in much the same manner as his guard's chest had been before he was thrown out of view, his final state unknown. Within a fraction of a heartbeat of it being thrown, it had killed one and maimed the other. If the mana wasn't so discoordinated and unstructured, Robert would have assumed it was the work of a powerful skill. The fact that it wasn't was even scarier. It had been powered by pure force of will. A hush had fallen on those remaining. The fighting had all but stopped as soon as the blindingly bright sword was brought out, everyone fearing that they would be on its receiving end. If the unveiling of the sword hadn't paused the fighting, the roar of pain that came from the usually stoic Lord of Frost would have. Everyone had turned to see what the source of such power was, and if not that, then the source of such anguish. Michael and Vanessa were off to one side while Zuri, Robert, and Bree were on the other. After Pierre's sudden appearance and Christopher's near single-minded chase after them both, the fight had moved with them, leaving all 5 of them close enough to witness everything that had transpired. Even if he wished he hadn't, Watching Ryan's arm disintegrate in front of him wasn't a scene that would go away soon. Following that, watching a man's chest explode like a tank round had been shot through it was another memory Robert didn't need. But he had them, and now he, along with Zuri, Bree, Vanessa, and Michael, all stood around the panting Viscount at a loss for words. Blood flowed from Christopher and turned the snow beneath his feet red as he turned to face the five of them. The dagger wound to his side was being held together with a thin veil of ice, while his eyes and nose steadily leaked blood. Whatever the sword had done wasn't light, for the tank to bleed like he was. His helmet didn't have a full faceplate, leaving the red streaks visible, along with his expression of wrath incarnate. Chris' point of view. Everything in me wanted to run off toward Ryan and finish the job, but my feet wouldn't move. I'd put everything into that last throw, even exacerbating whatever of a mess my spirit was in, and it was refusing to tear itself further apart. My demand for movement resulted in nothing. Even my call for my hammer to return was left unanswered. Something was very wrong, and I dreaded finding out by how much. I'd never felt such pain before, and my spirit had never been so strained and burned. I felt weak in ways I hadn't in a long, long time, like I was a level 0 human facing down a horned rabbit again. There had been chimes during the fight, and notifications blinked in my vision, but I could barely stand, let alone care about those right now. Jonathan had torn his spirit before, and this felt worse than that. My spirit, which was usually so unyielding and resilient, teetered on collapse. I knew what would happen if it did. Like a candle going out, I'd move on to be with the rest of my family. It was a surprise that such a wound could threaten my life so easily, but I figured it wasn't just the blow that had done it. Tyr's judgment demanded death, and no one who had participated in it was dead. By the way it was worded, the skill should have killed me. Being forcibly interrupted had nearly done it, but here I was, alive and kicking. Bree and Ryan as well, unfortunately. The only one to die was someone I hadn't used it on. I finally turned away from the direction Ryan had fled, looking back at what I'd thought would be the rest of them actively fighting. Instead, everyone was just standing still, looking at me. I rallied what energy I could to prepare, but Bree laid down her sword and put up her hands in surrender before I could muster anything up. I didn't even want to be here in the first place, she said with her hands raised. Robert, following her lead, took a step back. I only tried to stop the fighting. Zuri, having lost her 2 allies one right after the other, lowered her staff. I won't die in an unwinnable battle. I yield. Indignation blazed inside me at their surrender. Even with my ability to fight nearly bottomed out, my fury demanded release. Blood needed to be spilled. The fight certainly didn't feel over to me, but it was out of my hands. I wasn't about to beat down on someone who'd already given up unless it was justified. No one remaining had done anything to justify it. The one who had wasn't here. I turned to Vanessa, and she seemed to be in a similar position as I was. Steam rose from her body as I saw the decision war in her mind. She obviously wanted the battle to continue, but was also unwilling to force it. Seeing the avenues for my fury close, I turned on Bree angrily. Why did you interfere? She snarled angrily and waved a hand toward the east. That bastard told me to. He used some kind of contract magic to force me even though I didn't want to. As I said, I didn't even want to be here. Is that why you didn't fight to your fullest? I know you have a bloodline and can use more than just shields. I demanded. She nodded. It tried to force me, but I didn't let it. It was already forcing me to fight. I wasn't going to let it force me to go all out. That sounds familiar. What kind of contract was it? I asked, my voice still firm but easing off from before. I don't know. I'm not a contract lawyer. She shrugged. Ryan drew it up and made a sign with fancy ink. It was the only way he'd agree, and I didn't think anything of it. I didn't know he'd bend it like he had to force my hand or that such a thing was even possible. Other contracts are like a light tug, but this was a forceful shove. No way. There's no way he'd use that after fighting off demons and giving out those formations. That doesn't make any sense. What? My thoughts were interrupted by a confused Michael. What happens now? He'd whispered it, but perception was enough to hear it. Even mine. Bree looked to Zuri, Zuri looked to Robert, Robert looked to me, I looked to Vanessa, and she was looking back at me. Michael, who'd bought it up, was ignored. Fine, I thought. The duel as agreed to and witnessed was broken. In doing so, Zuri has forfeited and all terms agreed to are owed. Cessation of your offensive and a non-aggression pact for a period of 10 years. Reparations in gold, skill shards, and faction points during the next assessment. The details of which can be discussed between the two of you, I said. Zuri looked upset, but in the face of a continued battle, nodded in assent. Robert opened his mouth. I'm not done. I cut him off. As the party responsible, I demand that all trade agreements, alliances, or deals made with the faction New Canada be revoked. All materials, gold, skill shards, or the sale of dungeon access be denied. Any merchant company associated with his faction or that has its headquarters inside New Canada's borders be refused. Any appointed member of his faction higher than guard captain be barred from entering any city or pylon outpost owned, controlled, or administered by any of your factions. I watched their faces change, but I still wasn't finished. His citizens may still leave with no restrictions, but anyone affiliated or appointed will have their access revoked. Zuri was hesitant. Not to mention the costs to this, I'm not sure I can guarantee that. Smuggling and tax evasion are already a problem. I won't be able to control all trade with his faction. I was unsympathetic. You should have thought of that before choosing your allies. I'm not sure I can do that. The contract I signed probably won't let me. Bree was less hesitant. We can handle that later. For now, just give your word to carry it out after the contract is broken. I wasn't sure if it was the same as what Victor used, but we'd found ways to break whatever contract he created. It was painful, time-consuming, a lot of effort, and Bree's might not be the same, but we could do it. I wouldn't be able to anytime soon, but I knew someone who could. Ironically, John wasn't part of the group coming, but that could be changed. With that, I turned to the last one to agree, Robert. Vanessa had already cut Ryan off when he sided against her. I can advise the Admiral to restrict some trade and certain materials, but I don't have the pull to embargo the entire faction. He defended. That's not enough, I said plainly. You didn't have to jump into the fight, yet you did. I care not for your reasoning, for the choice was already made. Now you must deal with the consequences. You will return to Norfolk, convince Fitzwallace to turn away every ship bearing his faction's colors seeking his harbor, bar them from moving through your waters, and deny any attempt he makes to get around you. I won't go so far as to demand you sink his ships or follow him into deep waters, only that you force him there to begin with. Frostheim borders his west, Flame Falls his southwest, New Boston and the Empire his south, and the American faction the east coast. His only choice will be to brave the ocean or use the lake, but even there, he will be denied. It will take some concessions, but Patrick can make it so the Great Lakes Alliance will be closed to him as well. Concessions I will ask that you help pay. Patrick may agree purely because it was the 5 of us asking, but I wasn't sure and wanted it known that if there were concessions, they would be on the hook for them. If they didn't like the price, they shouldn't have started the war. Robert's face had hardened with every demand, but I didn't relent as I listed them all out. And if we don't? He said through a tightened jaw. If you don't, I will do the same to you. Frostheim will be closed to you. All trade, materials, or travel will be restricted. We will not march in your defense if you call. We will not answer any pleas for aid. If demons knock on your door, you will find no solace from the north. If beasts from the depths threaten your coastline, you will find no one to help you. If aliens from afar arrive and make war upon you, you will stand alone. I laid it out plainly. In every situation where aid would have been sent, it would be denied. The only thing I didn't threaten was participation in the assessments. Those mattered more than this, and I wasn't about to risk losing our protection. I would not demand the same from Vanessa or Marcus, but I would ask for it. I had a strong suspicion they would agree without much pushback. Robert was quiet before he responded. I will relay your words to Fitzwallace. See that you do, I said. You're threatening war, Vanessa said. The only faction left will be the Stormlands, and to get there, he will have to go through the waters you control and border. If you cut him off completely, war will be his only avenue left. I'm not threatening, I'm declaring, I responded. That coward wasn't only the cause of all this, but I'd bet he's actively working against our best interests. I'm not sure how he came into possession of a sword like that, but I do know it comes with strings attached. It might not be the infernal chains from consorting with demons, but they are the same in purpose and should be treated as such. Are you saying he's a traitor? Robert asked. I can't say for certain, but I can say the world would be better off without him, I answered. He better hope I don't find him on my way back. Chapter 412 Parley. Chris' point of view. Standing there talking while in excruciating pain was wearing on my patience. My still lingering anger didn't help matters, but I didn't much care at this point. The fact I couldn't physically go after Ryan upset me more than I was letting on. The fact no one else wanted to go after him only amplified that feeling. I understood their fear, but it was still aggravating. That sword was dangerous. What I was about to do next was something Abigail would say was ill-advised. I wanted to sleep, wanted to magically teleport home. I wanted to wake up tomorrow and have everything already solved and over with. Yet when I woke tomorrow, none of that would be true. You, I pointed to Robert, go home and relay my words. You, I pointed to Zuri, gather your army and return from whence you came. And you, I pointed to Bree before tilting my head in confusion. I don't remember seeing any members of your faction. Where are they? Thank God for that, Bree muttered under her breath before answering louder. I was forced to come, but my faction was not. I guess Ryan thought that I'd bring them with me. He was wrong. Then wait here if you want our help breaking that contract, I stated and turned to Vanessa. And I would like the best healer within 50 miles without fire mana, so that I can finally be healed for the first time in what feels like weeks. If I have to run back tomorrow with the same fucking wound, so help me, I might lose it. Run back? Vanessa questioned, but I ignored her when I remembered there was a faction I was forgetting. And someone tell the Canadians to fuck off as well, I said to no one in particular. Their time would come, but it wouldn't be now, unfortunately. What are you going to do? Vanessa asked. I've dealt with 4 factions. Now I only have one left to deal with, I said before walking away. I needed to lie down, but I had one last thing to take care of. Pulling out my messaging stone, I sent off a message to our incoming forces. The stone's range wasn't far enough to reach them, but we had people set up to act as relays in most northeastern cities. A woman in Haberdeep would pick it up and send it out for me. Elliot, take our forces and turn back around to help Marcus. Things have been dealt with here, and we no longer need your assistance. I will be on my way in the coming days, but it will be much slower. Things were difficult. Tell Hal to finally pick a vice captain to delegate to, as I need him here. Killian as well, along with his team. There's someone I need them to find. The trail would be a few days old, and Hal was a skill tracker, but his class wasn't dedicated to it. That was what Killian's team was for. He had started out as our investigator for criminals, and the team he'd put together to track down fugitives worked wonders. They'd quickly become known as the Bloodhounds. A fitting name for what they did, and matched Hal's Wolf Order theme well. They would find him. And Elliot, Michaela, and the Heartlands won't be the last. We have one more foe we need to put down, and this one is a little closer to home. I was not looking forward to the following days. Michaela point of view. Southwest of Gemini City. You're saying that Frostheim's forces turned around and are headed back in our direction? Michaela asked, just to make sure she was hearing the messenger right. Yes, my lady, the messenger answered. Scouts have them 2 days out from our position. If we don't take the pass soon, Marcus will soon have reinforcements. Michaela held back the urge to throw the cup in her hand across the room. Nothing had gone right on this offensive, and Tasunka hadn't been one bit of help. The dullard had gone and gotten himself killed in a fight she told him to avoid. He had the speed. He could have run around them, but knew he just had to prove he had the bigger. Ma'am. It was Sylvia who interrupted her thoughts this time. A rare boon in the shitstorm this had become. The woman's green hair had seen better days, and there were subtle rings under her eyes, but she sat strongly inside the command tent without slouching. Competence was hard to find nowadays, which made Sylvia all the more valuable. With just the arrival of some of Frostheim's forces, our offensive has slowed tremendously. The ground fights us, we can't rip down the walls without great effort, and sometimes it's just easier to go over them. If the rest get here, not to mention their lord. She left the rest unsaid, but all knew what she implied. Michaela had known, that they needed to finish this before Christopher came back. Him being drawn away was a gift from fate herself, but now it looked like it was over. Then it's best we hurry, she said with a feigned smile. If we kill Marcus before he arrives, do you think he'll demand vengeance? I heard he killed a baron from New York already. Delancey asked. He'd been a thorn in her side when the alliance first formed, but the Baron of Omaha had become a true ally over time. What he said had merit, even if Michaela didn't want to think about it. Michaela wasn't sure, but she took a reasonable guess. Not if it's done in battle. If we assassinate him, on the other hand, most definitely, but in honorable battle. No, I don't think so. She'd have to make contingencies in case that wasn't the case. But she felt confident enough in her answer. They'd wrung as much about the man as possible out of Alaric and a few other people who knew him, so that she could understand the gist of the honor the man abided by. The meeting took a few more hours, but a plan was made. Not everyone of the leadership agreed, but that was the thing with compromises. Everyone was on the same page and ready to move forward. That was all that mattered. Their time was running out. If they didn't push through now, they wouldn't get through at all. Lord Shieldwell was already proving to be a tougher foe than expected, and that was without the majority of his Northern Alliance helping him. If they managed to combine, Michaela wasn't sure of victory. No, more than that, she wasn't sure half the people she brought with her would survive, let alone victory. The sun rose the following day, and their bombardment began. There was just one last fortification to make it through before they could march on the city itself. They'd blown through 3 already, leaving one left standing. It had been a battered, crumbling mess on the edge of collapse a few days ago when the stone shifted. Reinforced with an energy Michaela could barely feel, but knew was there and that it was powerful. Roots struggled to tunnel through it, and her plants failed to weaken it. The Earth Mages faced the same struggle, reporting a tremendous increase in difficulty to bring the walls down, bordering on impossible for most. Only the strongest managed to do anything at all, and even they couldn't manage much. It was those same walls they battered with attacks now. Vines that had been braided into long slings launched boulder after boulder. They shook the ground as they landed, followed by volley after volley of artillery spells. The first day ended the same way it had started, and so did the second. No matter what they tried, they couldn't push through. Water, stone, and ice rose to meet whatever they could throw at the walls. All their attempts to tear it down or punch through were futile. The third day passed. The fourth. When a week of the siege was underway, a group in blue appeared in the northeast. What little progress they were making came screaming to a halt from the new reinforcements. The water, stone, and ice that had been staunchly defending the walls were joined by metal, and even more ice. Still, Michaela pushed on. The losses were light compared to previous battles. Assaulting the walls directly was stopped cold one time, and that was more than enough to force a change. They didn't charge the walls again. Instead, they bombarded the shit out of them in the hopes they'd fall. Attempts to go under or sabotage the wall were made, but to little results. Not that anything they tried worked. If only that dumb bastard could have held out for longer than half a day. Michaela raged internally. They'd have made it to the city by then if Tasunka could have stalled them for a few days longer or drawn them into a chase. They'd had Marcus on the back foot for a week. They'd sent him back one step after another, all until he got reinforcements. It wasn't even the numbers that saved him. It wasn't even their strength either. It was one man. One man's ability to saturate the stone and block all attempts to pull it down or burrow through it stopped them in their tracks. Without the wall, they would have taken the pass days ago. Michaela spent hours, days trying to push through whatever energy was keeping them at bay. It was different than mana, and something she'd only ever read about. Not many had spirit anchors, and it wasn't something widespread enough to commonly come across. She tested it, probed it, tried to siphon it off, to deplete it, to destroy it. None of it worked. Some attempts were better than others. Depending on what she tried, the fuzziness of the energy came into focus briefly, before it was lost once more. It was like clarity was coming into focus, even if she wasn't sure what it meant. She lost herself in the process, delegating all command to Delancey and Sylvia, while she concentrated on what she was feeling. It was like altering a spell, sort of. The way the mana was shaped ended in different results. Like how using different techniques caused different plants to grow from the same seed. Something impossible to do before, but possible now. She tried every plant in her arsenal, but none of them worked. She even experimented with new plants. Hybrids, mutations, grafts. Thorns worked best for some reason. It was like the idea of them was more solid. Spells with thorns weren't even the highest grade spells she had, but for some reason they were the best. With the idea fixed, she honed in on type, color, species, properties. Was it long and thin or short and fat? Was it thick and hard to break or thin and made to pierce? Was it green to blend in with the stem or red to stand out? Was it poisonous, or was it purely for deterrence? Michaela wasn't sure why this felt so important to figure out, but for some reason, she knew it was. Something deep inside her was tugging on her, wanting to be let free, wanted to be realized. It was the beginning of week 2 when something clicked. Everything she had been iterating and altering solidified into one complete idea. An idea, a clear and solid image, that resonated with something she only just then felt for the first time. Power rushed into her, and the stone that had been thwarting her was torn apart. Her plants rushed through and began burrowing through the stone. Fought back, but she pushed through with everything she had. Whenever enough roots were in place, she ripped and tore at what she could. The wall began to fracture and crumble. For the first time in weeks, progress was being made. They could do this. They could. Ma'am, the Lord of Frost has been spotted 2 hours out. No. We were so close. I just got it. We can. Sylvia, even more haggard and frayed, gave her a look. A look Michaela didn't like but understood. It's not worth it. We'll lose too much. We can fight him. I can fight him, Michaela said. She felt so good right then that she felt as if she could take the fort by herself. Her anchor had just formed. She could take him. Michaela, it's over. Delancey walked over. No, not yet. If we push on and face them both, you might live. Hell, even I might live, maybe Sylvia too, but did we do this for conquest regardless of the cost, or to build our faction's strength to protect all those we could? The losses we take wouldn't outweigh the strength we'll get in return. Delancey said grimly, always the man of reason. I can. The words died in her throat. He was right. They were both right. Even with her anchor, the losses would be unimaginable. She just didn't want to see it. Oh hell, it didn't matter now. Stop the bombardment. Send word of a parley. She ground out unwillingly. For the first time in 2 weeks, attacks stopped raining down. All because one man showed up. Chapter 413, Conditional and Unconditional. Chris' point of view. As it turned out, my presence wasn't that necessary back in the West. After getting healed up and making my way back, I received a message stating that a parley had been called, and peace talks were about to begin. Marcus had invited me to join, but I wanted to get a better picture of what was happening before I delved too deeply into that. I still wasn't certain of what the reservation was doing after their retreat. Based on the fact they hadn't been seen since, and our scouts followed them back into their faction's territory, I didn't assume they were up to much. The Heartlands, on the other hand, was a faction I had absolutely zero dealings with outside of Alaric's merchant company. Their leadership and organization were completely unknown to me, except for Michaela. Plus, I wanted to check in with Elliot and John. Arriving at what looked like a weathered fortress, Elliot looked like he'd seen better days, but was unwounded. Tired bordering on exhausted, but well enough. John, though, was ragged. His beard hadn't been shaved in weeks, a fact that alarmed me. He was a meticulous shaver. I wouldn't be caught dead with a cleanly shaven face, while he was the exact opposite. Seeing any facial hair growth spoke to how rough things had been for him. His mana was nearly completely drained, and his aura, or what I could feel from it, was greatly diminished. I couldn't feel his spirit due to my injury, but I assumed it was the same. Elliot, John. Glad to see you well, I said before trying to add some levity. Even if one of you looks worse than the other. Har. Har. John barely had the energy to react. You try holding a wall together for 2 weeks against hundreds of mages. Elliot, how do the orders fare? I asked, getting to the more pressing question on my mind. Good, he answered. Casualties were light. Only 13 from shields failing at the wrong time. 13 dead. It said something that number filled me with happiness rather than dread. And Zion? I asked. Stable, he said. Recovering but slowly. Ashley estimates months until he can ride again. Maybe a year until fully recovers. A year. No legs, 1 arm, and more wounds than I could count. An entire year. Things were taking longer and longer to recover from. H ranks and G ranks could be brought back from the brink of death in a few days, maybe even hours, depending on who was doing the healing. D rank took longer. Those with high fortitude, a stronger body, and a more robust physicality, it all added to how long it took. The more that was there meant that there was more to heal. The only way to compensate was with a high enough vitality to match. Most people didn't have that. I certainly didn't. And Marcus and his faction. How do they fare? I asked. Diminished, Elliot answered hesitantly. Death rates approaching 20%, wounded more than double that. I heard the weakest died quickly when the first wall fell. It only got worse after the second wall. It started. He went into detail, even describing the situation before our arrival to help Marcus, when we were still dealing with the reservation. How Michaela had used her spells to burrow through and under the ground, to rip the walls down, and strangle people with vines. How they could push forward as Marcus retreated, building forward operating bases in the blink of an eye, with walls of plants to discourage attack. Of how their offensive was unyielding and uncompromising, never letting up for a second. It was a tale of slow decline, until Elliot and John showed up. If they hadn't, Michaela may have been able to siege the city itself. I nodded, taking that information in. Looking around at the fortress that had seen better days, at the devastation of the surroundings, of the bodies that were still being carried off the field. You want to know the worst part of this whole thing? Elliot asked, only to answer without being prompted. With a few months to heal, they'll probably make it out stronger than they started. And that's without whatever he gets out of them in reparations. Obviously, Elliot didn't mean in numbers. Those would take much, much longer than that to recover. He meant in power. Average level, class grade. Strength other than numbers were where it would thrive. Laws that had been achieved. Anchors that had been realized. Skills that had been upgraded. Classes that, with everything else, would see a marked improvement when people reached rank thresholds. So will we, John said gruffly. Even though it didn't make me feel good, I looked at the awaiting notifications I had that weren't kill notifications. The ones I had put off looking at, not that it stopped them from existing. Congratulations. You have leveled up. You have upgraded a skill. Wind manipulation, common, wind manipulation, uncommon. From trying and failing to usurp Tasunka's control over the wind. I hadn't won that battle for control, but it had improved my ability. You have upgraded a skill. Shatter, common, shatter, uncommon. From ending the fight by ripping the wall to pieces. You have upgraded a skill. Glacial March, rare, glacial march, epic. From abusing the skill to heights I hadn't thought possible, and using it to run across the continent. You have upgraded a skill. Heavy weapon proficiency, journeyman, heavy weapon proficiency, adept. From fighting 2 Baron-level foes, and battle afterward culminating in a fight against 3 faction leaders plus Robert. It was my most extensive experience fighting against other weapon users. The style and rhythm needed was much, much different. You have upgraded a skill. Throwing weapon proficiency, apprentice, throwing weapon proficiency, journeyman. This could have only come from the few times I'd thrown my weapon when it mattered most. Funny, how a skill that had proven mostly useless improved now, in a way I never expected. It wasn't like a hammer was made for throwing. You have upgraded a skill. Pervading cold, uncommon, dominating cold, rare. Last but not least from dominating a man's arm. Breaking it, shattering it, and sundering it from existence. All had been gained through a great deal of blood and death. Some more so than others, but all had required a certain sacrifice. A sacrifice I knew others would abuse. The death of others. So much gain for such an immense cost, yet I knew, without a fraction of doubt, this wouldn't be my first transaction of such nature. Monsters were one thing, but humans? My fellow man? I sighed. Take care, my friends. Gather things as best you can. I want an estimate of how early we can depart for home. Where are you going? Elliot asked. To put a price on a life and negotiate for the worth of what was lost, I answered. The fortress didn't have any meeting rooms for the peace talks, so an earthen construction was conjured, and furniture had been brought in. It was dull, but it didn't need to be anything more than that. Walking up to it, there were 2 sets of guards at the door, one wearing vibrant green, and the other wearing a light blue similar to our own colors but not as deep or rich. Plus, his secondary color was black, rather than white. The guards knew me or of me, and allowed me access to the door without a word. Too far. Don't mistake my offer for parley as weakness. If you wish, we can continue what we've been doing for the past few days. Michaela said heatedly. Marcus's mouth tightened, but he relented. Fine, but don't act like you're doing me a favor. You were the one to call for peace. Not me. Seems things are going well. The 2 noticed my arrival at the same time. Christopher, Marcus greeted warmly. Michaela seemed much less enthused about seeing me. The Lord of Frost in the flesh. I've heard much about you. Lord of Frost? Is that what they're calling me these days? It was better than Iceman, at least, or whatever other odd name from before. Christopher is fine. I don't care for any imposed titles or epithets, I said and lowered into the 3rd and final chair in the room. It was wooden and without a cushion, but comfortable enough. I just hoped this didn't drag on. We were just discussing the details of Michaela's surrender, Marcus said, shooting the woman a look. Michaela snorted. Not surrender. An agreement to end hostilities. Oh Lord, help me. It seems the reservation is being left out of this. They are not free from the consequences of their actions, I said, pointing out that the 4th faction was missing from this discussion. That will be tricky. Things have been chaotic there recently, Michaela said and looked pointedly at me. I hear their leader is no more. We fought. He lost. I answered. That still does not free them from their responsibilities. Marcus tapped his fingers on the table. He looked at Michaela. We assumed you would take ownership of their pylons or vassalize them. I shook my head. No, I have no need of their land or pylons. Not only is it too far away, but it's not worth the trouble to hold it. What I didn't say was that I already had enough of a headache thinking about what was about to happen. I hadn't forgotten about Ryan or Canada. We didn't have the time, resources, or manpower to control lands so far in the south. Nor was it worth it when we were about to gain some closer to home. At my refusal, Michaela and Marcus looked at each other differently. Both bordered the reservation. Both stood to gain from taking a bite from their neighbor. That doesn't mean I'll take nothing. There's a price owed for the casualties we incurred. A price they still have to pay, leader or leaderless. I added, if someone is to take their land or vassalize their faction, that price doesn't disappear. What we could get from them wasn't much, but I would still get it nonetheless. Sarah wanted a good herd of their best horses for breeding and rearing purposes. She also wanted whatever records they had of beast taming and breeding. Classes, skills, techniques, all of it. Abigail had used her skill to communicate what we needed and what they could offer once she heard things were finished. Before we get to any of that, I cut the 2 off from whatever they were planning. I should mention what we are already doing. A message has been sent to whoever their new leader is, demanding their formal surrender. Their complete and unconditional surrender. After that is done, we will take or copy all body refining and mana cultivating techniques that they own, along with any books they've purchased or acquired. Any skill orbs will also be taken, if they have them. I hoped, for Hal's sake, there would be good win techniques. We had a few, mainly from Hal's personal purchases, but it wouldn't hurt to get more. Michaela snorted. Might as well conquer them at that rate if you're going to take everything. Not everything, I corrected. I have no need for their land or pylons. I will not force their people to move either, but I won't say no if they choose to relocate. Any mines, farms, or other resource harvesting operations are also something I have no interest in. Not that we could hold it even if I did. Any resource they had, we could find closer to home or acquire with a lot less hassle. We give up any claim on all of that, in return for a percentage for the next few years. With that out of the way, the discussion quickly devolved into negotiations on numbers. The Heartlands was next, and with Michaela sitting there and without unconditional surrender, the debate was much more back and forth. Marcus and I couldn't just demand everything. Instead, we poked and prodded at things we wanted, and she defended vehemently. Every concession came from tightly clenched hands. In the end, I was happy with what we got. Marcus got more from her, but he'd also paid more for it. Along with a non-aggression agreement, he made out with a hefty tribute and enough resources to rebuild everything that had been destroyed and then some. His faction would be seeing some growth in the following years. Frostheim, meanwhile, made out like a bandit, all things considered. We took few losses compared to what we got in return. We had to agree not to attack first, but we weren't planning on doing that in the first place. From the Heartlands, we demanded high-quality, high-grade food. Grains, fruits, and meat on a scale we couldn't produce in the north. Expensive wines and juices were nice, but not something we needed as a faction. We could buy them if we needed them. Also gold. There were things we could buy from Vulwyn that the Heartlands didn't have with the extra revenue. The one thing both Marcus and I tried to get were future faction points, but Michaela outright refused to even consider it. She knew, just as we did, that they were much too valuable to give up. The chance to buy things directly from the system was too big a boon to trade away. Altogether, I was satisfied with the way things ended. Even more satisfied in knowing that more would be coming from Bree and Zuri. Walking out after hours of discussion, the sky was dark, and the stars were out. We were too far south for the northern lights, but I still gazed up, hoping to see them. After a deep breath, I pulled out my messaging stone. Did you find him? Took a while for the response to come back, relayed as it was. No. His tracks mysteriously end a few hours north of where you fought. Something or someone came to his aid. Killian says it wasn't done under his own power. I sighed. Find him, hell. And that sword. I need to know what devil he made a deal with. Chapter 414, Revelations. 2 weeks ago. Ryan Claremont point of view. Pain consumed his existence. It was the only thing he could think about or feel. Any attempt to do otherwise was impossible. He couldn't even think about getting up and hobbling away, let alone set about doing it. His arm was just gone. His leg was gone. He'd used up the last of his mana just to stop the bleeding. His bloodline did what it could to put the pieces that were his body back together. But without mana to work with, the progress was slow. The only thing Ryan could do was lie there and groan in pain. Not that doing so helped in any way. The entire time, he feared discovery. Feared that Christopher and his hammer would step over him to finish the job. How the man had done what he had was beyond Ryan. The sword should have been enough. He'd been told it would be enough. The crunch of snow and rustling of leaves caused his heart rate to spike. He found me. Ryan held his breath and froze all motion or even the thought of moving. Maybe he won't. Look what we have here? A feminine voice mocked from much closer than Ryan thought. It sounded like the voice was coming from directly behind where his head lay. A woman? Instead of questioning how the person had gotten so close without notice, Ryan instead questioned why it was a woman's voice that had come to kill him. Not a woman he knew either. It didn't sound like Vanessa, Bree, or Zuri. When the big man said to come observe, I never thought it would end like this. The mocking continued. What about you, huh? Did you think it would end with you a cripple? And after all your scheming, too? He groaned. Words were still beyond his ability. Finally, the woman stepped into his vision, leaning over his broken form. Alabaster skin, black hair, and a relatively pretty face, with enough makeup for a touch of boldness, but not enough to stand out. Gray eyes, nearing black, stared into his with amusement dancing in them. Oh, that's okay, sweetie. You don't have to respond, the woman said with a feigned frown. It looks like you could use some help, huh? Ryan gurgled, as blood and saliva welled in his throat. Oh, you poor thing, she cooed, kneeling over him. We don't have much time, so we're going to have to be quick. She drew a paper from a pouch on her belt. The parchment was covered in words, but that wasn't the important part. It was the ink used to write them that drew Ryan's attention. Even as addled as he was, he recognized the ink. He'd bought it not long ago and had used it to forge an unbreakable iron fist around his faction. That same contract was being waved in his face now. More like chains. Oh, not so funny now, is it? Seeing how you know what I'm holding, there's no need to explain. Sign and I take you to be healed. Refuse, and I'm sure it won't take them long to find you. In your state, well, you can still hope for a quick death. And knew, he managed to get out painfully. Something else. It has to be something else. I'll give you any. Oh, honey, that's not the way this works. She cut him off while patting his arm playfully. The arm that he still had, but waves of pain spread from the playful pat, causing him to cry out. Maybe if you'd won or were at your best. But as you are now. She gave his broken body a casual scan. No. Sign or die. Ryan's hand moved to the sword hilt, but he was too slow. No, we can't have that now, can we? Her foot pinned his hand to the ground, inches away from the hilt. Sign or die, she repeated. Who or why you? Ryan stammered. The woman smiled. You can call me Maeve. The name didn't invoke any understanding, and neither did the big man. Ryan didn't know who this was or who she worked for. He wasn't sure which was more frightening. The terms are simple. I'll even read them to you, she added, turning the paper toward her like she was reading it for the first time. Do what we say. Tell no one. And tell us where you got the sword. It was a slave contract. I'm afraid we'll have to get to that last one now, she said, increasing the pressure on his hand. I don't know. He got out through the pain. Oh no. Sign first. She waved the contract in front of his face. Can't have you holding out on me or lying. You wouldn't lie to me, would you? The words dripped fake sweetness, matching her fake smile. He fought to free his hand to do anything. Rally his mana, muster his strength, use his law, but none of it worked. What pitiful light he managed to conjure was consumed by shadows. His law was ripped away. All his attempts ended in failure. Ryan's hopes died. He didn't want to die. Resigned, he sent mana into the slave contract. Good boy, she mocked, pulling out a glowing red potion from a pouch and pouring it down his throat. The potion was high grade, but it wouldn't do much. His body was too broken for that. He needed a healer. What it could do was allow him to talk clearly. Now, where did you get the sword? She asked, putting the empty vial back into a pouch. Ryan tried to repeat the words from earlier, but he couldn't. A tightening in his chest forced him to say something else. A man. Oh, a man? Who? She pressed on. I don't know. I swear. He forced out. He gave it to me. Gave it to you? Her face turned suspicious. What did he want in return? Everything that had happened was catching up to Ryan. The pain, the blood loss, the whiplash, all of it. The healing potion helped bolster him, but it wasn't nearly enough to keep him conscious. Chaos. He wanted chaos. That was all he managed to say before sleep overcame him. Maeve looked down at the broken body in front of her and shook her head. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. The bishop point of view. The bishop woke with a start, his body trembling in fear and blood leaking from his nose. Cold sweat covered him from head to toe, with a throbbing pain right behind the eyes. The dreams weren't getting any easier to deal with, even with his improved strength since they began. Honestly, he would have been more suspicious if they had gotten easier. It was not in the nature of the divine to be easily understood. The revelations given to him weren't meant to be received easily. Still, it took him a while to calm his beating heart and get his body under control. It wouldn't do to be seen so rattled by the acolytes. One job. You had one job. The words echoed long after they had first been uttered. This revelation hadn't been the most pleasant. The bishop had failed in his task, and that was made clear to him. Giving away the artifact to someone outside his control was explained to him as a poor decision. Less than poor based on how angry the divine messenger seemed to be. The goal was achieved. Chaos was wrought. Thousands died in the conflict. The bishop had tried to defend himself. Thousands? You claim the goal achieved. None who died held any importance. They were useless, only there to fill space, spill blood, and die. The previous assessment was an army test. It won't do the same type twice in a row. That would defeat the purpose. The bishop had to hold himself back from asking follow-up questions to that, specifically what the larger purpose of the assessments was, but he'd learned early that questions weren't his to ask. He was told what he needed to be told. Instead, he bowed his head silently. If a few of the leaders had died, sure, it might be able to be construed as a task accomplished, but none of them? 5 faction leaders fought in conflict, and none died. None. What did you think I meant when I said to cause chaos? Sow discord. Fan the flames of war. Stoke discontent. I thought I was clear. I apologize, Your Holiness, the bishop said. I will strive to do better. See that you do, or these revelations won't be nearly as pleasant for you. The Lightbringer demands progress, and I don't want to be the one to tell him you failed. The memory faded, as he'd woken up right after. The morning sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, bringing the first rays of light for the day. Earlier, but not too early. The bishop dressed and made his way over to the deacon's door before knocking upon it heavily. Deacon Hector was slow to get up, but he opened the door moments later, wearing halfway decent attire at least. Deacon Hector, I've got a job for you, the bishop said. Irritation flashed in the deacon's face, but he quelled it quickly. The bishop knew he wanted to ask if banging on his door this early was necessary, but he'd kept that retort to himself, luckily. Yes, bishop, what does his grace have need of me for? The polite answer instead of the first one to come to mind. I need you to go east, through Trough the mountain pass, and retrieve an artifact that has been lost with all due haste. He explained, of lesser import is the task of weakening the resistance we may face when we spread over the mountains in the east. The deacon nodded in understanding. The artifact comes first. Retrieving it is your primary objective. He restated. What of the faction leaders of note? The deacon asked. Are there any you aim to convert? Not at this time, he said. Initial estimates only had one who might side with us, and he's already been inducted. The rest will be quite stubborn. I hear and obey. I'll leave within the hour. The deacon bowed. Good. Blessings to your journey. Chapter 4:15 Epilogue. Gods of Man. Viseriamet's point of view. Location, the Braveheart Kingdom. Ha! Pridwin exclaimed, laughing loudly at the scene in the scrying pool. Serves that pompous asshole right? Viseria's projection had arrived not that long ago and only caught the tail end of what seemed to be a duel of some kind. One involving a terribly conspicuous sword, and a human he'd not thought about in a while. I see there's no love lost between you and the Father of Light, Viseria teased. He knew already the feelings Pridwin had for the Lightbringer, but it was good fun to rile up the human god. Bah, the Father of Light, Pridwin mocked. He's a right cunt. You can just come out and say it. No one but him is so arrogant as to claim an entire natural element. Better yet be the father of it. Lionheart laughed, refilling his drink while full of mirth at his fellow god's distaste. He's been sending priests to spread the grace of the light inside Pridwin's frontier kingdoms for the last few centuries. He's had to tamp them down every decade or so when they go too far. Cultists, more like... Pridwen mumbled into his tankard. Viseria smirked at the exchange. It was little details like this that he missed while away. Small interfaction relationships that made things interesting, rather than just spending every day meditating. Cultists you threatened to go to war over, Lionheart added with a smile. And I would have too, if you and the rest had stood with me, Pridwen exclaimed. Pridwen, we are already at war with Zirathuan, Axiom, and the Grey Horde. We told you we can't go to war with the faction of light before you even asked. The kingdoms of man can't afford a fourth front, you know that. Aloan explained dryly, like this wasn't her first time doing so. Viseria winced. He'd known about the Grey Horde, but not Axiom and Zirathuan. Humans had always been at war with the Grey Horde. The two hated each other with an undying passion. The humans mainly out of spite, and the insects out of instinct. They'd been at war for longer than they hadn't. Axiom and the Zirathuan the Undying? Viseria commented with a raised eyebrow. When did that happen? Pridwen scoffed, and Lionheart looked to his wife to explain. Aloan did so unhappily. Right before this new integration, the machines are still unhappy with how Farah was resolved, and the Lich just likes to be a nuisance. Her withering gaze settled on Pridwen when she explained about Farah. Pridwen shrugged his shoulders. Hey, it wasn't my fault the planet got destroyed. They shouldn't have started anything if they didn't like how it ended. Pridwen, the blunt instrument he always is, Viseria thought. His friend always felt more was better, even if it ended with a few planets being permanently rearranged. It turned out that other factions didn't appreciate that as much as he did. The fact that it usually happened to their planets had absolutely nothing to do with it. How are things faring? Well, I assume if you three are here and not there, Viseria asked. While his presence was a projection, he could tell that the three human gods were there in person, rather than through clones or projections. Lionheart shrugged. We're letting the younger gods and demigods handle it until things heat up. The integration kicking off has cooled things, but it shouldn't be long until things come to a head. The Automata and Undead faction are a good first war for them. Much better than the demons or Holy Pantheon. The rest of us old hands will step in when needed. Speak for yourself, Aloan said. I ascended during the first race war. It was exactly the pressure needed to reach godhood. All three turned their attention back to the scrying pool as the scene shifted away from the trinket of a light sword and focused on an entirely different area on the planet. An armored warrior wielding a spear battled furiously against a horde of demons. Normally, facing so many on their lonesome would be the end of the human, but this wasn't just any human. It was Pridwen's blessed, in his full glory. His entire body glowed with power as the bloodline of heroes thrummed in his blood. Mana and spirit both coalesced into phantom warriors who stood beside him in his battle against the infernal creatures. Their ancient armor matched what the man was wearing, and all wielded similar, rounded shields and spears. The phantoms fought as one with the warrior in a fight that should have been overwhelmingly one-sided, but was instead a beatdown by an army of one. I see your blessed is doing well for himself, Viseria commented. This wasn't his first time seeing the human, but it had been a while since. The man hadn't been as powerful then, and certainly hadn't had an anchor at the time. Leo will make a fine warrior one day, if he makes it that far. Pridwen couldn't keep a touch of pride from his tone. It's rare for the bloodline of heroes to be seen outside of my domain, and even rarer in a first-generationer. It makes me wonder what their world was like before this. Their history must be rich for the bloodline to surface there. You and your bloodline, Lionheart scoffed. Not all of us can be so blessed to be given one at birth. That subject was a common enough argument between the two that Viseria had heard it many times before. Pridwen prided human-exclusive bloodlines above all else, while those not born with one had to seek power elsewhere. It wasn't to the point that Pridwen looked down on them because of it, but he definitely favored one over the other. Changing the subject so the two didn't retread the same argument, Viseria asked, Are there any other planets from this integration you're interested in? The planet they were watching had interesting things going on. 3 factions in the beginning stages of infiltration, and Pridwen's blessed. It also had the human with Emer's technique, not that the three human gods knew that. Only he, Scotty, and she did. No, Pridwin said. There's another human planet, but it's not that fun to watch. They had magic before, so their entire worldview wasn't turned upside down overnight. Not much changed in the way they run things, which doesn't make for much entertainment. I'd rather do border detail than observe the demons, and the rest aren't all that interesting at the moment. Some are nearing the next assessment, but it's still years off for most. Visaria perked up at the mention of the next assessment. He'd been at the border fighting against the Blight when the first round of assessments kicked off. He'd managed to catch the tail end, and the planets who'd undergone their assessment later, but he'd missed most of them. Depending on the planet's grade, this would be the second to last assessment, and for some it would be the last. Then they would be opened up to the universe at large. Not many factions would waste resources on a D-rank world, but some would for a C-rank if they should fail. An entire D-rank planet didn't contain the resources to make conquering it worthwhile. Teleportation was out of the question, and most forms of travel as well. The expense alone wouldn't be worth it. Only the closest factions would even attempt it, and even then it was rare. C-rank worlds were trickier. They were worth more, but they were also better defended. Could be profitable to fight over it, but it could also be a nightmare of a resource drain. Grabbing one before the natives reached C-rank would make it more than worth the trouble. B-rank worlds. Those were precious. It wasn't often such a high-grade world didn't already belong to a faction. It was rare for one to float by in the void or appear in new integrations. If one such world were to fail, losing its protections, there would be a great many factions willing to fight over it. Some, like the Lightbringer, were already trying to assert control over it, even with the protections in place. Others as well, through blessings or other means. If the natives of a world declared for a faction, the battle was already won. They just had to fend off other factions at that rate. How do you think this planet will fare in their next assessment? Visaria asked, indicating toward the scrying pool showing Pridwin's blessed. I haven't seen much, but they seem prepared enough from what I've noticed. Nearly 100 barons, over a dozen viscounts, 7 counts, and even an earl? Eloan detailed the list of noble ranks already presiding over the world. Depending on the type of assessment, I highly doubt they'll fail so early. They've been hardened better than other worlds, Lionheart said. Not only have they fought each other, but they've fought off demons, angels, and mystical beasts. I first assumed it would be their lack of unity to do them in, but they've proved capable of working together when required. There was a faint smile as he spoke, as he was most likely remembering the early days of humanity's introduction to the wider universe. It was terribly similar to how the integration for that planet was playing out. They remain unbowed, Pridwin said, taking the question seriously. I expect them to continue to remain so. I'd be disappointed if they failed. If they failed, or if he failed. Visaria poked, waving at the pool. Both. Leo is still young, and so are the rest of them, but they show promise. They would make a fine addition to the kingdoms of men, he answered. I say that not only because of my interest in Leo, but in others as well. The Admiral's leadership, Arthur's steadfast nature, Ealing's martial prowess, Chloe's bushwhacking. Pridwin chuckled as he used the native term. Ade, Obu, Sergei, Wilhelm, all of them show promise. Even if only one of them ascends, it would be worth it. Eloan chuckled. I notice you left a few out of that list. We just witnessed a battle involving 4 prominent leaders, and one where I'd say he showed more than just promise. Taking a spirit injury like that and continuing is worthy of praise. You know how he is. Lionheart cut in before Pridwin could defend himself. He doesn't focus on anyone who has yet to be tested. Visaria knew the reason behind it, and it wasn't because Pridwin looked down on them. It was because he didn't like to see them fail. Building your power upon a bloodline that could be stripped from you was crippling if it ever was. It was extremely rare to ever come back from such a wound and reach the heights you once had. He considered it a waste of talent and was the main reason he favored human bloodlines. They couldn't be stripped from you. Pridwin lost a great many friends and even family during the First Race War. The agreement did little to assuage his grief, even after all this time. The frost giants will be fair with him, Viseria found himself saying, and so will the dragons with the fire mage. She embodies the flame well, but the astral elementals are notoriously picky. What of the world walkers? Lionheart asked. I haven't seen one acquire their bloodline in an age. It's not an easy one to get without the system store. What will they do with the gravity brawler? I'm not sure, Viseria admitted. He hadn't spoken to a world walker in a long time. It will depend on whether they take notice or not. I could see it going either way depending on which one of them administers the test. Ha! Pridwin laughed. The great Viseriamet's unsure. Viseria smiled at the rib. Twice now he'd been unsure of something thrown at him, and both times the one responsible resided on the same planet. Chapter 416 Happenings in the West. 3 months later. Austin Point of View. Location west of the mountains. His eyes cracked open just as the sun was beginning to crest the horizon. Waking at sunrise was becoming a more and more common occurrence. It was like his natural rhythm was stirred when dawn broke, and he awoke with the sun. It didn't happen every day, as there were times such a rousing wasn't enough, like after tough fights or long nights in the tavern, but today wasn't one of those times. Sure, he'd been in the tavern until the wee hours of the night, but endurance and vitality were a fabulous thing. That much alcohol on so little sleep before would have left him comatose. Now he was right as rain at dawn. Being the courteous gentleman that he was, he slipped out of the sheets slowly and dressed as quietly as possible. Austin wasn't one for sappy goodbyes. A note left in his place was a much better extraction from the situation. Writing said note only took a few seconds longer as it wasn't his first, and neither would it be his last. Slipping out of the door was even easier, and he was free to straighten up without worry of making too much noise. Austin took in the cool spring air with a smile. The warmth of the sun's first rays settled on his face comfortably as he made his way through the city. Tahoe wasn't as large as a few other cities Austin had been to, but it wasn't the smallest. Mountainside definitely took the crown for largest in population, but Seattle wasn't far off. Vancouver and Portland also outdid Tahoe in size. It was a shame they didn't come up with better names. Reusing the old world's names was dull, in Austin's opinion, but it was better than adding new in front of it, as so many others did. That said, Tahoe was definitely the most beautiful. Mountainside had its charm from being carved from a mountain, Vancouver and Seattle had their bays, and Portland had its own claim to fame, but it was nothing compared to Tahoe. The Rockies weren't the only mountain range to be altered. The Sierras saw an improvement as well. They still weren't as tall as the massive wall that the Rockies had turned into, but they were certainly a pain to climb. It was easier to fly at most points than try on foot, even though his flying was still limited. Instead of building a city and then digging a moat around it like one would naturally assume, the founding lord had built an island in the middle of the lake instead, creating one of the largest moats Austin had ever seen. Usually, this would be impossible because of all of the large and powerful sea creatures that would take umbrage with the fact that you were trying to build an island in the middle of their home, but that wasn't the case for Tahoe. The lake hadn't been that large to begin with, and there hadn't been anything that powerful inhabiting it. Even mutated as the aquatic life was upon humanity's return, the local population was more than enough to handle it. It helped that the founding lord was a powerful warrior with a strong water affinity. He could fight above and below water with the strength required to keep the lake in check. Not many could claim the same. Austin doubted even Marcus could. He didn't have the right skill set for underwater combat, and his long glaive wouldn't help matters. Taking the ferry every time he wanted to enter or leave was a massive hassle, but it was almost worth it just for the views alone. The sparkling sapphire glow from the sun reflecting off the waters, the mountains in the distance, and the beautiful city on the water could have been the inspiration for a dozen paintings. It was an hour before Austin stepped off the small boat and into the small shoreside village, and people were in the process of starting their day. Hammers began to ring as smiths began their work, and carts rattled down cobblestone roads transporting materials to where they needed to be. Small armed and armored groups made their way out of inns and headed west to the nearby dungeon. The wait list to delve into it was long, but Austin had found a way around it. People were more than happy to sell their slot when you threw money at them, and Austin had more than enough money to do so. Wandering had its perks, and coming across powerful beasts was one of them. Not only was the essence worth it, but selling the parts was quite profitable. So was the random plant or herb he found along the way. Wood, too, he cut down from the rare tree. His profession gave him the skills necessary to make the most of his finds, which really brought the coin rolling in. Pulling up his explorer's map, he was just about to set his course when something caught his attention, causing him to stop. A man with his head down, staring at a compass, stood in the middle of the road. It wasn't the odd behavior or the fact that he hadn't looked up as he effortlessly eased his way around carts and pedestrians that caught his attention. It was what the man was wearing. Large furs over thick wool and hide. Even in the coldest days of winter, such heavy attire wasn't needed this far south. The man stuck out like a sore thumb among thin cotton tunics or breezy wool shirts. If that wasn't enough, the deep blue coloring and pure white accents of his clothes were more than enough to identify the man. The sigil sewn into the chest, portraying a hammer on a field of snow, was just overkill at that point. A messenger, Austin thought. The compass was a dead giveaway, and it was only a moment before the man looked up from it and locked eyes with Austin. The needle was pointing directly at him and had stilled once he stopped moving. Messenger skills are such bullshit. I knew giving them my aura and mana signature was a bad idea. I was literally a world away. Sir Austin. The messenger put his hand to his chest in greeting. I have a letter for you from Lord Zelensky and Lady Stevenson. Ha! Lord Zelensky. I told Chris he would lose that battle. No time like the present, mate. Let's see what the big man wants, Austin said, holding out his hand. Mana welled in the man's hand as two skills were used in quick succession. One was probably to verify his identity, while the other pulled the letters from thin air. Oh, fascinating. D-rank messengers have spatial storage? I wonder what grade of profession is needed for that? I doubt common messengers get something like that. Austin curiously took the two letters and asked a question he was curious about as he opened them. How long did it take you to find me? It couldn't have been easy, eh? The Canadian colloquialism had stuck, no matter how hard Austin tried to stop it. 3 months, sir. You didn't make it easy. The messenger replied. 3 months? Messenger skills are more than just bullshit. Took me a year to get here. I wandered a bit and lingered in some areas, but still, he quelled the frustration as he focused on the letters. Both were covered in twirling lines that glowed an icy blue. The runework was obviously Christopher's, but the meaning was beyond Austin. He assumed it was a rune lock to make sure only Austin opened it. He's made vast strides since the last letter. That one looked like a child's drawing compared to the one in his hand. The seal was different, too. The wax was stamped with the very sigil ring Austin had gotten for him years ago. The hammer's definition came through even on melted wax. Abigail's seal was different. Instead of a hammer in a field of snow, she used a cresting wave with a background of falling snow. He read Christopher's first. Austin, I'll begin this letter by saying I don't know how quickly information spreads or how far you are from home, but I felt I should write you to make sure there are no unfounded rumors you hear or come across in the coming days or weeks. I still remember the wild rumors Lakeshore sparked, saying I destroyed the entire city, even when that was patently untrue. It wasn't even a quarter of the city, and that ignores the fact that it wasn't even me doing most of the destroying. That being said, there has been a slight altercation in the south that I've had to deal with. The Heartlands Alliance and the reservation both set their eyes on Marcus's treasure, and disabusing them of that notion took a bit of force. Additionally, we answered Vanessa's call when Zuri finally attacked. The fact that New Boston and New Canada joined her made it more difficult, but it was handled all the same. As of when I write this, both have been resolved, one more permanently than the other. Unfortunately, I did not come out of both unscathed, but I have since returned home and am in the process of healing. Ashley is fixing me up, but my spirit is another matter. If you remember Jonathan after the assessment, you can imagine my frustration. I'm unsure when it will be fully healed, but circumstances force me onward all the same. While helping Vanessa fend off an attack, I came into direct confrontation with Ryan, the leader of New Canada. if you remember. I didn't think anything of him at the time, but he proved my instincts wrong. Somehow, he managed to come by an artifact that should not be on Earth. It stank of the divine and was the source of my spiritual wound. I managed to injure him critically, nearly fatally, but the rat managed to escape somehow. Hal and Killian both returned empty-handed. Neither a corpse nor a lead was found. Killian suspects outside help, but he isn't certain. Wounded as I am, killing him comes first, but more importantly, destroying that sword. I won't allow any divine meddling ever again. As Ashley heals my body, I'm building what's required for the next body refining step. Reaching body of copper without the use of my spirit or anchor will be difficult, but I will need it if that sword is used against me again. Depending on when this reaches you, our eastern offensive may have already begun, or it could be just beginning. Lyndon is our best messenger, but even he will struggle to find you depending on how far you've gone. This letter isn't to call you home or urge you to return. I just wanted to inform you of what's happened before you hear the twisted truth as the information spreads. Hope you are well, Christopher. As Austin reached the end of the letter, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Reading it was a roller coaster of high and low, only to be wrapped up with a hope you're well. He needs to get better at transitioning. That being said, additionally, unfortunately, he can do better than that. Still, it took him a moment to digest the information. It had taken Jonathan months to heal his spirit after tearing it during the assessment. A wound strong enough to hobble Chris? Dealt through a sword like that? The implications scared him. If Christopher felt the need to reach body of copper before running down Ryan, then he'd seriously downplayed the threat the sword posed. The worst part was that Austin knew Chris wouldn't give up. Not when it came to anything to do with gods or the divine. Not after the tutorial. Even if the chance of death was nearly certain, Chris wouldn't stop. The letter said circumstances forced me onward, but in reality, it was his own need to end the threat. Not that Austin faulted him for it, he hated the gods too, but not even waiting until fully healed. Austin moved on to Abigail's letter, hoping it contained better news. Most of it was the same, a retelling of what happened from a second perspective. She had stayed in Frostheim and hadn't participated in the battles themselves, so it was from a secondary source, but funnily enough, it contained more information. Chris downplayed a lot, Austin thought as he read a more in-depth recounting. He left out killing Tasunka, getting a chunk torn out of him, running east in a week, fighting Zuri, Ryan, Bree, and Robert. Hell, he nearly caught up to my level in only a few weeks. Austin's jovial attitude fell away when he got to the part that was different from Chris's letter. I know he will try to downplay what happened and act like he's unbothered, but I'm scared for him, Austin. You know how he is. I caught him washing his hands for an hour the other day, just scrubbing and scrubbing even though his hands were clean. He refuses to open up and won't talk about it other than stating the facts of what happened. I had thought he was getting better, but the sword opened up old wounds he refuses to let heal. Feeling that energy again. I worry for him. His nightmares are back, too. You remember how he used to wake up screaming in the middle of the night during the tutorial. It's even worse now. Not only does he wake up screaming, but his aura flares like when he's in the middle of a fight. I just don't know what to do, Austin. I know you like your adventure and are probably off in the wilderness somewhere. But if you're on the way home or thinking of coming back, I know Chris could use your presence. By the time you get this letter and make it back, he should be coming back from the east. Depending on how things go there, he could be better by then, but he could also be much worse. By the way he's stomping around and how prickly he's being, I don't expect the battles to take very long. He had little patience for things before, but now he has none. With Ryan and Pierre out of the picture, New Canada won't be able to put up much of a fight. I just hope he doesn't do anything rash out of anger. If that isn't enough to sway you into coming home, our next assessment isn't that far off from what I can tell. On average, it's 10 years between E rank and D rank assessments, but it can come as early as next year. 5 years is on the low end historically, but it's happened before. It would be nice if you were home just in case it starts early. We don't know if we'll get an early warning like we did last time. We can't count on having a large obelisk with a clock. After what we did for Vanessa, you could even spend some time with the fire treasure she has as well, which is totally not a bribe. With love, Abigail. P.S. Ryan is a light affinity support mage. Once Christopher finishes with New Canada, he should have some light aspect skills, techniques, and materials. Ashton too, but I doubt he'll have better than Ryan. Austin burned both letters to ash and let his hands drop to his side before letting out a deep, resigned sigh. One wasn't enough, so he did it again. If his nightmares were back, things were worse than he thought. He'd gotten over them after the tutorial had ended, but it had taken months. He also didn't take killing people well, which he had done a lot of if the letters were enough to go by, and he was about to do more. I could have done without the guilt trip, though, he thought bitterly. Do you have anything you wish for me to carry back? Lyndon, the messenger, asked. It will help my skills if I'm carrying a missive. Austin sighed for the third time. Does it have to be a letter? Or can I just tell you? Orally works just fine. Austin smirked. Have you ever seen Mrs. Doubtfire? Chapter 417, Beyond Mere Rage. Fitzwallace, the Admiral point of view. Location, New Norfolk. What, exactly, did he say again? Fitzwallace asked, assuming he'd heard his friend wrong the first time. All trade, agreements, alliances, or deals made with the faction New Canada be revoked. All materials, gold, skill shards, or the sale of dungeon access to its faction members be denied. Any merchant company associated with his faction and has its headquarters inside New Canada's borders be refused all trade. Any appointed member of his faction, higher than guard captain, be barred from entering any city or pylon outpost owned, controlled, or administered by your faction. Robert restated. That wasn't all either. He also added specifically for us that we turn away every ship seeking our harbor, restrict them from crossing into our faction's waters, and deny any attempt they make to get around or through our land. So, basically, a complete and total embargo? Fitzwallace asked, already feeling the urge to sigh in frustration. Yes, with a picket line as well, to keep them from going further down the coast, Robert answered. Fitzwallace pinched the bridge of his nose, even though it did nothing for the oncoming headache. He knew the next question he needed to ask, but he really didn't want to know the answer. He asked all the same. And how did you respond? Robert shuffled his feet and looked up at the ceiling, acting like a child who'd been caught stealing sweets. Oh dear. Please tell me you didn't respond with a provocation? Fitzwallace hoped. Well, you see, we had just gotten done fighting, and I wasn't exactly in the best state of mind. He'd been wailing on me with that giant-ass hammer of his, and it didn't exactly feel pleasant. My bones still feel fractured, and the fight was months ago. Robert quickly defended himself, which only made Fitzwallace's hopes die further. If Robert felt the need to preface his answer, it was bad. What did you say? He asked again through clenched teeth. And if we don't? Robert muttered just loud enough to be heard. His face fell into his hands as he tried to imagine that the words he'd just heard weren't real. So not only did you answer with a provocation, it wasn't even a veiled one. It was a direct and blatantly obvious one. Yes, Robert said. You've read our diplomat's evaluation of him, correct? The behavioral analysis and best practices when dealing with Frostheim. Fitz didn't wait for Robert to respond. You know that direct provocations will go poorly with someone like him. Yes? I know you do, yet you did so anyway. As I said, after getting pummeled, I wasn't exactly thinking of what the pencil pushers put in their report about his attitude and behavior. Robert defended himself. No, you were hot-headed and did the exact opposite of what was recommended. Fitzwallace admonished before sighing once more. The entire reason I sent you up there was to prevent exactly this. We have no idea what test we might face, and keeping the bloodshed and casualties to a minimum was our best chance of improving our odds. Especially those of powerful people like nobles, Fitzwallace said. Yet not only did you fail to de-escalate things, but you accomplished the exact opposite, causing a brawl between every significant faction in the Northeast. The war ended, Robert stated, as if it made up for what happened. But a new one was declared not seconds later. The Admiral shouted, failing to control his volume for the first time since hearing of this nightmare. Honestly, the Admiral was a bit surprised that Frostheim hadn't moved out already, but he also hadn't known that Christopher had been so severely injured until now. In that line, he asked, "How soon do you think he will be healed?" Robert considered the question for a moment. "Fully? I'm not sure. You and I both know spirit injuries last longer than physical ones. It took you months to recover from overstraining your spirit after the last test, and his injury was more than just overstraining. I felt it burn and tear. I'm surprised he's not dead." At being mentioned, the Admiral thought back to the mess his spirit had been after the test. He'd called on way too much power to elevate his power high enough. It had lasting effects that had persisted for way longer than he thought they would. If this injury was similar, he couldn't even predict when it would be completely mended. At least something good came out of this. Fitz clung to that harder than he should have. More information is always a good thing, even if it did come about the way it did. General classes had skills that were deeply reliant on information, his own included, both your own and your enemies. That wasn't to say Frostheim would soon be an enemy, but the possibility wasn't zero. Battle plan, tactical advantage, battlefield awareness were just some of the most common that required knowledge of both what you could do, but also what could also be done to you. Various simulation skills required it even more to be useful. He looked at the sheets of paper in front of him, the written report Robert had given him detailing skills, power sets, threat evaluations, and other useful bits of information. "Is there anything not in here you feel worth mentioning?" he asked, pointedly looking at the evaluation for the man's strength stat. Something that high was insane, and would require at least a legendary class, but he trusted Robert. If he estimated it to be that high, then it most likely was. Other than the fact that his spirit is absurdly strong, it's not only the fact that he survived whatever the sword did, but it was strong even before that. "I used my anchor generously during the fight, and it had little to no effect. He warded it off easily with his own anchor like it was nothing. The only other person to shrug it off so easily is you, but that's when you have your army around you," he answered. "You think he's close to taking the next step?" Fitz immediately asked. Spirit advancement was notoriously difficult, but it came with a level of power equal to the difficulty. He'd been trying to take his next step for months and hadn't accomplished it yet. If an advancement was made, and Christopher managed to create his first authority, probably, Robert shrugged. "But I don't know how the wound will impact things. It could delay things while it heals, or it could complicate things." The Admiral was of the opposite opinion. "Or it could make things easier. Injuries and wounds don't work like they used to. Recovery itself could be what he needs to take the next step. Spirits are odd, you know that." "Maybe," Robert said noncommittally before focusing back on the original question. "Other than that, his level increased a lot since our last known report. I wasn't able to get an exact number, but it's above 120. Any guess on what skill he picked?" "He has some kind of force duel skill, but I don't know if that came from his class after evolving or if he chose it specifically. Other than that, it wasn't obvious if any were new or more powerful than the rest. He also has a skill that floods the area with Arctic mana, but he had that before his evolution. A few nasty weapon skills. An armor skill that covers his body in thick plates of ice that are stronger than they have any right to be. He also had a skill that felt like my mana responded slower and cost more to use, but that could have been something else." Robert listed off, "Outside of getting hit with the hammer, the ice creation skill is definitely the most deadly. Even touching it burned my skin, and that was with my bloodline and defensive skills going." "Anything else?" Fitz asked, taking note of everything mentioned. The dossier had some of it, but it would also need to be updated. "Not that I can think of. His body is still only stone, his mana is still at its first step, and his laws are still tier 2. The Admiral's lips curled ever so slightly as he pulled open a drawer of previous reports and picked one out of the stack. "Your information is outdated." The words on the report were few, but they were enough. January 30th, 6 AC Lord of Frost has returned, along with his troops. February 7th, 6 AC Lord of Frost, head builder, and a large crew left the city. Major construction taking place in the north. Can't get close without discovery. Suspect at the location of the ice treasure. March 19th, 6A.C crew returned, along with head builder, but Lord of Frost remains in the north. March 31st, 6AC Lord of Frost returned, bloody and haggard. Identify blocked, but level remains similar. Suspect body level improvement. The reports coming from the north were sparse and rather shallow, but they kept him abreast of large movements. The expense hurt, but it was better than no information at all. If any attempt were made to peer deeper, reports stopped coming altogether. It didn't take a genius to guess what happened. Robert's eyebrows rose as he continued to read. He did it even with the wound? It appears so. Robert shook his head. Crazy bastard. What of Zuri, Vanessa, and Ryan? From what I read, Brienne didn't do much other than use misshield us and swing her swords. Fitzwallace asked. Vanessa and Zuri were pretty evenly matched from what I was able to catch of the duel. If it had continued, I'm not sure which would have won. If I had to pick, I'd wager on Vanessa. Her eyes are that of a killer, whereas Zuri is just now getting to that point. Power-wise, it's a toss-up. Closer to Flame Falls, where fire mana is abundant, Vanessa would win easily. At night, under the stars without a nearby source of fire, Zuri would win. Both have second circle mana cores, both have powerful bloodlines, and both have high-grade spells they can throw around with enough variance to cover most weaknesses. Most notably, Zuri uses her speed to her advantage, and if she were ever caught or contained, she would struggle. Vanessa, though, is slower but not in a way easily contained. Any attempts to catch her or trap her would just end with an explosion of fire to the face. Robert said. And Ryan. Robert sighed. A healer/support mage mix, from what I could tell. He didn't sling around many offensive spells, choosing to instead disorient and disrupt. When pressured, he relied on Bree and his hidden guard to cover for him, instead of fighting himself. His self-healing ability is tremendous, but without a team around him, easily beaten if he can't flee. Not that it matters all that much. Why wouldn't it matter? The Admiral asked. You didn't see his eyes. Fitz, Robert said seriously, talking about Christopher. They went beyond mere rage at the end of the fight. With a man like that after him, I doubt he lasts long, even with that sword of his. You'll be moving that dossier to the deceased pile before the year is up. As if fate wanted to drive the point home, a rushed knock sounded from the door, only to be repeated seconds later before a chance to answer was given. Enter, he said loud enough to carry through the room's enchantments against eavesdropping. A runner quickly entered with a rushed salute before presenting a piece of paper for him to grab. He did so and dismissed the man before reading the message. April 7th, 6A.C Lord of Frost and Army march out of Frostheim, headed for Fort Hope. Number over 2,000 strong. ETA 2 weeks. After reading it, the Admiral offered the sheet to Robert. It seems you're right, he said. Even wounded, he's out for blood. Chapter 418 Unexpected Development. Chris' point of view. Location. Outside Fort Hope. I pulled Remy to a stop just as Fort Hope came into view and stared out at the thick stone walls. The city had come a long way since the first time I'd seen it. Back then, it was a hodgepodge of wooden stakes and mounds of dirt. Now, it looked like a proper city with the defenses and fortifications to defend it. At my halt, everyone behind me sprang into motion without needing to be prompted. Wagons were unpacked, and the first stakes of our camp were getting hammered in, preparing for the siege. I dismounted with a wince. My body still ached, and my spirit, even after months, still hadn't healed. Being without it was difficult. You never knew how valuable something was until it was gone. Upgrading my body without it was a process I never wanted to go through again. If circumstances hadn't been what they were, there was no chance I'd have gone through with it. But they were, and here I was. Status. Name. Christopher Zelensky race. D. Human * class. D. Warden of the North. Legendary. Level 128 profession. D. Adept Runesmith. Epic. Level 107 affinity. Arctic faction. Frostheim. Leader. Title. Viscount. Strength, 3827 agility, 1759 perception, 794 fortitude, 3175 endurance, 2057 vitality, 1280 intelligence, 687 wisdom, 1094 acumen, 646. Free points, 0. Laws. Lesser Law of Ice, Tier 2. Lesser Law of Wind, Tier 2. Body Stage. Body of Copper, Northern Wind Body. Might of the Arctic Body, Mana Heart. Perfect Ignition, Stars of Primordial Frost. Spirit Stage. Anchor Formation. The runesmith levels were nice but not all that impactful. Building the chamber needed had taken the work of months, and was the large chunk of essence gained. Patching up everyone's armor, including my own, fixing weapons, and forging a few new ones got me the rest of the way. Level 128 had come from Pierre. I'd hoped to get more from Ryan, but it wasn't to be. Every free point had been thrown into endurance in the attempt to patch up a sinking ship. Without my spirit to reinforce it, the stat was struggling to keep up with the demand I placed upon it. I got tired quicker, battles took more out of me, and I had to sleep more often. If I were asked to run back and forth between Gemini City and Flame Falls now, it would take twice as long and leave me exhausted on the other side. Even with the boost I gained from Body of Copper, increasing my physicality, it wasn't enough to make up for the loss from my anchor. Enough, I pinned my negative thoughts. Focus on the now, not the past. The siege would be more difficult but not impossible. We would take the city all the same. Even with the walls, towers, and weapons stationed atop them, the end result wouldn't change. I wasn't exactly thrilled to be back here under these circumstances. I knew some of the people inside the city. Fort Hope wasn't all that far away, and traveling back and forth wasn't too difficult. The same could be said for the Oathbound. Some of whom we would be fighting against were friends. But we couldn't ignore it. Fort Hope was the key to reaching further east. It stood in the way of reaching the rest of New Canada, and not only was marching around them silly, but it was also tactically unsound. Everyone knew not to leave an enemy at your back. Hugo, start setting up the trebuchets, I called out to the man. Head builder Philip and Uncle Braden were our best when it came to construction, but they didn't specialize in combat, nor did they enjoy it. Both would have come if I'd asked, but I hadn't. They weren't the only builders in the city. While the Oathbound focused on combat, that didn't mean they ignored their professions. Hugo, one of Elliot's lieutenants, was a fine engineer. I wasn't sure what grade his profession was, but it was more than good enough to be put in charge of the construction efforts. Others with carpenter or woodworker professions followed after him. A few mages moved to help, while lumberjacks and woodcutters got started cutting down and processing the lumber they would need. A few hours was all they would need before the siege weapons would be ready. Portable walls, towers, and battering rams would follow if they were needed. Before I could begin coordinating the enchanters and wardsmiths, Hal shouted at me, "The city gates are opening!" Everyone stopped what they were doing. We were still thousands of yards away, but if they aimed to charge us, we needed to form ranks quickly. Shields and weapons were readied, and I grasped my hammer. I strained my eyes to see what was happening, only to see a lone figure step out of the gates before the gates slammed shut behind him. The figure's armor gleamed in the sun with an unnatural radiance. I couldn't make out his features, but I had a guess at who it was. "Gabriel, you're in charge of warding the camp until I get back. The supplies and enchanting materials are in that wagon," I said. "I'll go see what he wants." Just in case, I checked the straps on my armor and made sure everything was prepared. Ashton had surprised me before, and I wanted to be ready for anything. Before I could walk out toward him, Hal grasped my shoulder. "Be careful, Chris. It could be a trap." I nodded. "I will." As we walked toward each other, no one atop the walls pointed weapons at me or aimed any of the larger weapons. The large ballistae and catapults remained positioned where they had been and did not track my movement. That didn't mean others weren't hidden behind the walls doing exactly that, though. Once we got a few 100 feet apart, we both stopped. The distance was getting larger as levels were gained. It used to be a few dozen feet away. "Ashton," I greeted stiffly. "Christopher," he said back. I heard what happened in the south. Then you know why I'm here. I do, he said, his voice full of disappointment. I told him not to. I warned him many times, yet he did it anyway. Warned him of what? I asked. What would happen if he went through with what he planned? His goal was to drag you into 2 wars to weaken you, and if there was a chance, kill you. Ashton said bitterly. I told him it wouldn't work. Told him and Pierre that their plan was stupid. It would just piss you off. You were right, I said before moving on to why I was there. Is he here? No, he shook his head. I don't know where he is. No one I've reached out to has seen him either. Wherever he is, I don't know. Did you know about the sword? I asked. No, I don't even know where he got it, either. He answered. He didn't exactly keep me in the loop. Ashton could be outright lying, but it didn't seem that way. He seemed genuinely disappointed with what had happened. Do you wish to settle this between the 2 of us? Or must we do things the hard way? I was wounded, yes, but I was confident I'd still win. It would also be so much easier if he said yes. Whoa, hang on. Ashton raised his hands placatingly. We don't have to do all that. Before I could ask what he was talking about, his right hand swiped through the air a few times. His mana remained still, and he didn't seem to be doing anything besides swiping at the air. That was until a dome of light expanded from the center of the city. A dome of bright, white light rushed out in all directions. It passed through the walls, over the land outside them, through Ashton and I, passing over my army, and continued into the distance. The only reason I wasn't swinging already was that I knew the light wasn't an attack. Came from the pylon. It was the same light that rushed out every time land was claimed, and happened every time a pylon was upgraded. The system menus didn't require hand movements, so him doing so was for theatrics, or to prove his actions. Ashton hadn't upgraded his pylon, and there was no new land that needed to be claimed. The only other reason was if the land was claimed by a different faction. Or, in this case, if faction affiliation was changed. Ashton had left New Canada, and now Fort Hope was now unaffiliated with any faction. When I warned him against going through with it, I told him what would happen if he did. I knew the first city you'd march on would be mine. I also knew we would fall before any help could come. Even if it did come, I didn't like our chances. He said, if the cause had been just and we'd been in the right, I would have fought to the end. But it wasn't, and his greed would have killed my city. He knew I would leave his faction going into it, and he did it anyway. I was caught off guard. This wasn't what I was expecting when the parley was called for. You'd break your oath? I questioned. I broke no oaths. Ashton clarified. I broke no contract, either. When I joined New Canada, I did so because I naively assumed it was what was right. Rejoining the government was only natural. It was only later that I realized my mistake. He didn't have you pledge loyalty? Service? I asked, confused. It was one of the first things I asked of anyone. An oath of loyalty. Ashton chuckled ruefully. No. He accepted our affiliation because he needed the resources we had, and assumed that a day we would leave would never come. He tried to put some new contract in front of me a few months ago, but by then, the ship had already sailed. The others signed. I did not. Well, fuck. I have, nor want, any affiliation with him or his faction. Not anymore. Ashton said. In that spirit, I don't want to fight you either. Anything that can be done to avoid this, I will. Search the city for him if you want. Go through every house and warehouse, if that's what it takes. I won't kill everyone here because of my pride. You just let us in? If you promise not to harm the civilians, yes. Your goal is to find Ryan and his sword, is it not? So I will prove that neither is here. What the fuck am I supposed to do now? I declared war and was expecting a battle. I thought we'd be fighting to take the city right now, not to be offered to search it. Part of me wanted to do it anyway. I couldn't be sure Ashton was telling the truth. I wasn't certain this wasn't some elaborate scheme. Plus, my feud with Ashton hadn't been settled. There was still the fact he allowed the mine to be attacked. But was that worth sieging the city over? No, it wasn't, even if I wanted to. Micah told me this wasn't a lie, and I couldn't ignore it just because I didn't like what it said. Fine, I sighed. I agree to harm no one besides Ryan, unless we are attacked first. Very well, Ashton nodded, relieved. He waved a hand in the air, and the city gates began to open once more. This time they remained wide open. Ashton didn't turn to leave. When I first started this and formed Fort Hope, my goal was to do what was right, to protect my home. I want to get back to that ideal. I lost myself to greed and ambition, I admit, but I also know where that path leads, and it's not one I want to walk again, he said, looking at me intently. Oddly intently. I said nothing. I was clueless where this was coming from, and more importantly, where it was going. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, and I know that I've made some mistakes, but I hope that I can make up for those mistakes. He wasn't quite sure what to do with his hands, and he seemed anxious now, which was odd. If anything, he should have been anxious before we agreed not to fight. Your faction has lived up to that ideal, even when it would have been easier not to. I want you to know that I ask this not because I'm currently factionless, but because I truly believe it. Pieces began to fit together. Viscount Zelensky, if you'll accept, I would be proud to swear myself to you and enter your service. I'll swear any oath you ask of me as long as it's just and right. I'll swear to defend that oath, even when my blood is spilled and my body is broken. Until my last breath. How was I supposed to answer that? Chapter 419 Logistical Problems. Chris' point of view. Location, Fort Hope. I was put on the spot and wasn't sure how to respond, so I did the first thing that came to mind. I delayed. Instead of answering right then and there, I told Ashton that I would think about it. It was neither acceptance nor refusal, and I honestly wasn't sure which answer I was leaning towards. Sure, he'd pissed me off a few times, but he never actually did anything that bad. Nothing irredeemable or close to it for that matter. He crossed no lines either. The question came down to whether I wanted him to join my faction or not. Also, if I trusted any oath he would swear. I didn't have anything that would prevent someone from breaking their oaths, and I wasn't going to get one either, even if it was offered. Forced compliance wasn't what I was after. I would be no better than Victor and Ryan if I did that. We'd had a few members of the Oathbound quit and renounce their oaths, but none yet had broken them. I wasn't sure how I would respond if one ever did. It would be the ultimate betrayal, on a level I hadn't experienced yet, so I didn't know how I'd feel or respond when that time finally came. I hoped it never did, but I knew it would. After finishing with Ashton and telling him I would get back to him, the search of the city started. I trusted that Ashton hadn't lied, and Ryan really wasn't there, but I needed to make sure. Had to make sure. Hal, Killian, and nearly every Oathbound with a tracking, searching, or hunting skill went to work combing up and down streets. It took hours to cover the entire city, and when it was over, no sign of Ryan was found. As the sun was setting on a day without bloodshed, I found myself in a command tent with Elliot, Hal, Gabriel, and, surprisingly enough, Abigail. John was in Flame Falls dealing with New Boston's leader, Bree, and Rachel declined participating when I asked her to come along. Not that she didn't want to or that she didn't find the cause worthy, but because she had delayed switching her profession long enough. She'd delayed it because I'd asked her to go to the assembly, then delayed it again when Vanessa had called, and I wasn't about to ask her to delay it a third time. Twice was already enough. So I was surrounded by the usual leadership, with the addition of my sister. Abigail's presence had, at first, been a surprise, but it made sense when I thought about it more deeply. Frostheim wasn't going to be under attack anytime soon, and her class could use the levels. She'd gained a few after evolving, but not nearly as much as those who'd participated in the battles. I see no reason to say no, Hal shrugged. He made a few mistakes, but those were understandable in his position. He wanted to weaken us, so he didn't say anything. We just don't like it because it happened to us. People died because of what he did, I responded. Yeah, and people died for a whole lot of reasons after that. If you're just looking for a reason to say no, why are we even discussing this? Hal said back. I sighed. He was right, I was looking for reasons to say no. His city is positioned well. southeast of Frostheim and northeast of Emberhold. Close enough that trade will be easy, but far enough away that we're right on top of each other. He has the resources we don't, with the forest in the east, and not only because of the lumber. I hear it's filled with dungeon break monsters and strong beasts. Abigail listed off. I turned to Elliot because he hadn't said anything lately. Gabriel had already stated that he didn't care one way or the other and was just listening in. It will expand what techniques the Order members have available to them. We don't have many with the light affinity, but they still need mana and body techniques. Not to mention the growth it will provide. We can barely field 2,000 when we call. If Ashton joins, that would grow. We saw firsthand how our numbers will be an issue going forward. He explained. So you think I should accept? I do, Elliot said. All right, it's decided then. But I want someone in the family to stay in Fort Hope until things settle down. Have Carrie or Mitchell come stay in the city. Mitchell's done enough sulking, I said. I think we should discuss what our plans are for this campaign, Abigail said cryptically. If you're asking if this is worth it, you know just as I do that it is. Even if they signed contracts with that blood, and it will be a lakeshore situation with every city. Even if we'll be forced to siege it down, kill the leaders, and incapacitate those who are being controlled. It will be worth it to halt any attempts to influence the world. I stated grimly. She knew what would happen if we allowed gods to get their roots set. We needed to pull them out while we still could. No, I'm not asked if this is worth it. I know that it is. I'm asking about the logistics of what we're about to do, she said, which eased some of my rising frustrations. I thought she was about to fight me about it. What about the logistics? Well, we just annexed Fort Hope and the 30 or so thousand people who live here. That's nearly a 40% increase in our population right there. Our proximity helps, and Ashton joining willingly will make things much easier. But there will still be some transitioning issues. Now think about the other cities. Montreal, Quebec City, and Ottawa are the big ones, but even the smaller ones will be a challenge. Montreal alone has 3 times our entire population. Even if we win, we won't be able to hold it unless you want to personally stay in the city and make sure everything goes smoothly. Even if you stay in one of the cities, holding the rest will stretch us too thin. The orders won't be able to protect such a large area. Traveling back and forth will take months. Quelling any unrest and managing the cities will be impossible. We just don't have enough people. The only way to grab all of it is to go slow, annexing one city at a time, which will take years. The transition to incorporate Lakeshore took months, and that was only 10,000 people, roughly. What she said made sense, and there was nothing I could say to refute it. The more important question, though, was whether I even wanted to conquer all of the land. I was doing this to find Ryan, not take over his faction. I was content with the 2 cities I already had, and now I just added a third. Plus, the population increase alone would be impossible to adjust to without problems. Food, resources, dungeons, manpower, and making sure every city had enough defenders. Classes and professions made it so every person was worth more, but even without levels, we would need more people than we had. How much do you think we can reasonably take? Elliot asked while I was thinking. The settlement waves aren't all that bad if we plan accordingly. They only come every 3 months now instead of every month, which makes things easier. The Order should be able to cover 2 or 3 small city-level pylons as long as they're not too far away. The waves aren't the only problem. Administering them is. With what we have and the manpower we can spare, 2, maybe 3, but they have to be close. Ottawa is much too large and too far away. Abigail tilted her head up in thought. Shieldreach, Smooth Rock, and St. Marie are our best bet. They're small enough and close enough to fit the bill. There were still maps hung up that detailed our future plans, so I looked over to see where those 3 cities were. Smooth Rock was the closest, directly southeast of Fort Hope, nearly directly between the lakes and the southern tip of the Hudson Bay. It was through a heavily wooded forest, but it would be fine with a road. St. Marie was the next closest, but much further south on the coast of the lake. If we were leaving from Emberhold, it would be the closest, but we weren't. Both cities kept similar names to what they used to be. Shieldreach, Old Sudbury, was the furthest and sat a few days east of St. Marie. From Frostheim, the trip would last over a month. Smooth Rock was the smallest, at just over 10,000. St. Marie had around 30,000, and Shield Reach had a similar population to Frostheim at 60,000. What do we do with the rest? Hal asked, pointing to the dozen other points on the map marking new Canadian cities. Abigail turned to me, putting me on the spot. Give them back, I tentatively said, to which she shook her head and rolled her eyes. Sure, right after we get done sieging their city and thoroughly search it, we'll just give it back. Leave them to clean up the mess while we move on to the next one. Her sarcasm was thick. Technically, it was viable, but it wasn't exactly right. We had to do something, but we also couldn't stay and rule the city either. An idea came to mind. Could totally backfire, but it was still viable. It solved all our current problems as well, without me having to sprint from city to city after we were done keeping everything from falling apart. Hal, get me 3 good messengers, please. I walked over to a desk with pen and paper, beginning to write. Hal looked curious, but left to go flag down the messengers I asked for. Abigail and Elliot were intrigued, while I wrote the 3 messages I planned to send. Vanessa will pay us back sooner than she thought, I said while writing. In her latest expansion, she already controls the Toronto area, and Ottawa isn't that far away from Flame Falls. If I let Zuri use the land around Montreal for farming, she can temporarily watch over the city as well. And after John finishes breaking Brie's contract, she can take charge of Quebec. I hope she speaks French. You'll just give them the cities? Abigail asked, confused. No, not give. Request that they temporarily take charge of them. I said, with some stipulations, of course. They can take the cost for defending and administering the city out of the tax revenue, while sending what's left over to us. It'll be small, but it's still coin we can use that we don't have to do anything for. Then, when we've finished annexing Fort Hope, Shield Reach, Smooth Rock, and St. Marie, we can take back the reins of the others one by one, if that's what we end up doing. I still wasn't sure controlling all that land and that many people was a good idea. The future headaches alone didn't seem worth it, but that was a future Chris problem. That's mighty trusting. What if they don't hand back the city once we give it to them? Abigail questioned. Or fudge the numbers so we don't get any money. Or 1,000 other things. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, I said, finishing up the last message. We're already planning on conquering them once. We can do it again if we need to. I cleaned my ring up nicely and channeled some mana into the runes etched into the metal, before pressing it down into the wax seal on all 3 messages. The wax was closer to pure enchanting material than regular candle wax, and expensive to produce. The mana I channeled into the ring began to spread as the runes did their work. Like frost creeping along glass, glowing lines started to spread outward from the wax and covered the parchment entirely. When the lines finished connecting and covered the entirety of the folded parchment, the job was done. They were as protected as I could make them. Only Vanessa, Zuri, or Brie would be able to open them without destroying what was inside. Are you sure about this? Elliot asked. It solves all our problems, I said. We don't have to slow our march to a crawl and waste months every time we take a city. We don't spread ourselves too thin, and we don't leave Canada in ruins. Win, win, win. Hal came back with 3 messengers in tow, who quickly accepted their orders and were swiftly on their way to the 3 faction heads. What if they say no? Hal asked after getting caught up on what was happening. Nothing says they have to agree to do what you ask them? Vanessa owes me a favor for helping in her war, Brie owes us for breaking her contract, and Zuri will do it because she needs the farmland. She might complain that she has enough problems with Empire City, but she'll do it in the end. I explained. With no other issues, I clapped my hands happily. Now, who wants to go conquer Canada? Chapter 420 Plan for Smooth Rock. Chris' point of view. The days that followed weren't the most enjoyable, but they passed nonetheless. The search of Fort Hope amounted to nothing but wasted time and effort. No one on Killian's team found any sign that Ryan had been there at all, nor had any of the wolves found his scent. Ashton was thrilled when I told him of my acceptance, though. He got down on one knee right then and there and gave me his oath. The same one that the rest of the Oathbound had sworn. The only difference was that this time I got to see Oathbound Frostguard work in the moment. It wasn't the chain Tyr's judgment manifested, but watching the link get forged as it happened was intriguing. It stung my spirit a bit, but the worst of the wound had settled after months. Healing, though, was still a long road. I could feel my spirit slowly knitting itself back together, but it was slow. Afterward, he even pledged his army if I should need it, but I turned him down. Adding new forces right this moment would only throw off the experience we had managed to gain. Plus, his forces weren't at the level ours were. Not after our stint in the south. Instead, I had him get a garrison force ready so that he could manage the transition of any cities we took. Instead of having to stay for weeks after the battle, we would be able to hand it off to him and move on to the next one. Ashton delegated that task to Noah, his second in command, while he and a few other select individuals would be coming with us. I didn't have a reason to refuse, and he didn't necessarily need to personally handle the transition. Grace was running Frostheim while Abigail and I were away, but Sophia was still traveling with us. She would handle most of the administration work, while Noah was just there to make sure nothing got out of hand. Of the people Ashton selected, one of them was the ranger from so long ago, Victoria. I hadn't seen her since we dealt with the demons, and she had grown a lot since then. Her gear had been upgraded, and her presence signaled a strength even some of Elliot's lieutenants could barely match. She was certainly stronger than that Brooklyn Baron, whatever his name was. Ashton himself had changed since then as well. I was expecting him to be somewhat above average strength-wise, but he'd really put some work in. Not only did he have a radiant mana core that felt like looking at the sun, but he had a solid band of light orbiting it for his first circle. He was further along than me in that regard, but I highly doubted his body measured up. Now that I'd reached body of copper, it was hard to imagine that there were many people on my level. The handful of others didn't stand out as much, and even the weakest lieutenant in all three orders felt more solid. Not to disparage them for that fact, the order leadership was a hard bar to measure up against. With Fort Hope taken care of and a few new additions to our forces, we set out a week after our arrival. A lot less blood had been shed than expected, but I had a feeling that was about to change. Smooth Rock wouldn't be as easy. The forest separating us wasn't only heavily wooded, but there were a number of enemies inhabiting it. It was nothing our forces couldn't handle, but it would still take time. Time they could prepare, as there was no doubt they knew we were coming. It took us a month to wade through the forest and reach Smooth Rock, and it was immediately clear that our arrival was expected. Sharp wooden sticks covered the field outside the city's walls, and what appeared to be a freshly dug trench surrounded the walls. No doubt there were traps littering the killing field in addition to the visible deterrents. As our line of forces arrived, I fired off the same orders as I had outside Fort Hope. Hugo got to work building the siege weapons while the rest started setting up camp. This time they would be used. While they did that, I got to work setting up the wards. We were far out of range, but just in case some spell or something else was launched, we would have protection. After finishing my work, I moved on to the next step. Pushing my aura to its limits to not only reach the city, but cover it, stung my recovering spirit, but I did it anyway. To not make it any worse, I got right into it without preamble. Citizens of Smooth Rock, your city is now under siege. We ask all those not affiliated or participating in the fight to leave the city now. If you cannot leave the city, vacate the area near the walls and find shelter, preferably underground. I give my word that all those who do not take up arms will not be intentionally harmed. Those that do will be ended. There will be no quarter given to those who stand against us. You have 3 hours. Sadly, it was easier to give that declaration the second time. With notice sufficiently given, I walked back to where the command tent had been set up. It was clear from just the way the city had been set up and the preparations they had made that this was going to be a lot different than Lakeshore. We needed a plan that went beyond me just smashing open the gate. Reaching the tent, I found a dozen people ready and waiting for me. From the 3 orders, there were Elliot, Hal, and Gabriel who led them. Anders, Gavin, and Meredith, the 3 vice-captains, respectively. For lieutenants, there was Hugo, who was in charge of the trebuchets, Sydney, who was the head of the ranger units and could speak to their capabilities, and Jax, who was in charge of the artillery mages. Rachel was usually in charge of this, but she wasn't here with us, so it fell to Jax. Outside of the orders, there was Abigail, obviously, in addition to two newcomers, Ashton and Victoria. They were both high-level fighters, and I wanted them to see how we did things. Also, I wanted them in the room to point out anything they knew or could do that we weren't aware of. Zion's missing presence stung a bit, as he would usually be the spokesman of our mounted forces, but at least he was making a recovery. Some wouldn't be. In the hours it had taken to break camp, start setting up the siege weapons, set up the wards, and give notice, a cartographer had gone around the area and sketched up an up-to-date map of the city and its surroundings. It wasn't the most artistic of maps, but it noted what it needed to in the time we needed it. "All right," I said, standing over the freshly penned map. "Let's see how we can do this with as few losses as possible. Ideas?" Everyone else in the room had spent more time looking over the map than I had, so I opened the floor to them. We had all also gotten a good look at what we had been facing when we arrived. "Do you think you can smash open the gate again?" Elliot opened the floor. I shook my head. "I don't think so. They've placed rubble in front of the gate, burying it under tons of dirt and rocks. I'd have to smash through that first before I reached the gate." "They knew we were coming and prepared." Ashton lightly coughed. "I may have told them how you attacked Lakeshore." I nodded, acknowledging the information, but moved on. It was information we now had to deal with, but it didn't help us get through the gates. I could maybe try going through the walls, but I don't know how well they're built. I'm stronger than I was then, but a wall is different than a gate, I said, thinking about it deeper. Plus, I won't have my spirit to aid me or protect me. I left that part unsaid, but from the way Abigail was staring at me, she was thinking the same thing. "If through doesn't work, we can try over." Elliot pivoted well. "We could build ladders to scale the wall. It would leave the bulk of our forces waiting to climb while getting shot at." Hal said, "I know your order prides itself on its toughness, but that's a stretch even for them." "Hal's right," I said. "It would lead to a lot of losses." "Towers, then," Elliot responded. "It would take some time building them up, but we would be able to scale the walls without problem. They aren't as tall as Frosthaim's, only about 50 feet, give or take." "How do we deal with the trench?" "We won't be able to push them up against the wall," Anders asked. Elliot shrugged. "We could build them so the top bridge extends far enough if we have to, but we could also fill the trench with something." He turned to me. "Ice if you want, or earth. I'd say I could do it, but I don't have that much metal and create it from thin air like you can. Anything solid enough to hold that much weight would work fine." "Who would push them?" Ashton asked. "Anyone on the outside would be sitting ducks." I turned to Elliot, and we both had the same thought. It just went to show how new Ashton was and how much he still had to learn. "You've seen how we do things, Ashton. Did you forget what faction you are now a part of? Do you think we will struggle to find volunteers?" I asked with a small smile. Ashton opened his mouth but stopped, thought about it, and said, "I forgot. I knew you guys were slightly mad, but I didn't think it would be at the level of volunteering to get shot at mad. Before we get ahead of ourselves here, we need to be practical. The tower would need to be higher than the wall at over 50 feet, while also being stable enough to withstand any spells or impacts the city throws at it to destroy them." Abigail interrupted. "Now picture that much weight and bulk being pushed over uneven ground with traps in the way while being shot at." There was a pause while everyone pictured what she had said. "We could have mages stationed inside the towers with mana shields to protect them against attack. If individual shield spells aren't enough, a ritual cast shield would be more than strong enough." Gabriel threw out there with a nod from Meredith. "The only problem is that most of the mages who are competent ritual casters usually focus on artillery magic. If you take them away, our magical bombardment will be weaker." I turned to Hugo. "Can we compensate with more siege weapons? We only have the support staff to man 24. We have enough to man up to 30, but that will be pulling from other areas. Any more, and you'll need to hold people back from other units." He answered. Jack spoke up. "You'd also have to take a few more earth mages from the battle lines. Creating the boulders needed is a lengthy process if you want them done right. Compacted for additional denseness and law improved takes time and effort, not to mention mana. It's worth a few earth mages and support personnel if we can destroy a section of the walls. It will give us another opening to use at the very least. I thought out loud. You know what kind of resistance we saw at Lakeshore? I suspect it will be worse here. Compared to Lakeshore, Smooth Rock had a similar population, but they had more levels. Smooth Rock's forces had fought in the assessment, while Lakeshore had not. They had also fought their own demon incursion and dealt with a few dungeon breaks inside the forest. It was also less strict than Lakeshore, which led to a higher average level. While I was confident in myself and my ability to force open a path, that was only one choke point. If we all streamed in through one opening, the concentrated fire we would see would be unbearable for nearly everyone but the strongest few. If every archer, mage, and ranged attack in the city only had to focus on one point, even I would be hesitant to weather it for long. A lot of people would die following behind me if that were the case. Ideally, there would be 3 or 4 places we could break through at, but that was a later issue. That solves the issue of the towers being attacked, but that doesn't fix the issue of getting them to the walls in the first place. Something that tall needs to have a sturdy base to build off of, which means a lot of weight. Abigail stated, "There are potholes, divots, traps, and stakes filling the field you'd have to push it through. What if I pave the way?" I said. "Before we charge, I can remove all the stakes in our path and lay down a sheet of ice, smoothing the way. It'll take a bit of mana now that it's not winter, but I can do it." Abigail started, but I cut her off. "Yes, I know I don't have my spirit anymore, but I still have my fortitude and armor. That's more than enough to weather whatever they can throw at me," I said. The larger these battles got, the more dangerous it was getting to step in front of all the attacks. Lakeshore hadn't thought I'd charge the walls alone, and had trouble targeting an enemy moving as fast as I was. I doubted Smooth Rock would have the same limitation. Every ranger and spellcaster would be forewarned of my tendency to charge the walls. They'd be ready for it. While I was confident in my new body, I wasn't invulnerable. But I would do it anyway. I'll carry a shield just in case. It's not like I'll need my hammer. I placated her. It would help defend while I was being shot at. With the right runes, it would be perfect to deflect arrows and spells. It would take some time enchanting someone's shield, but I could get it done in 3 hours. It wouldn't be pretty, but it would work. With no one else attempting to shoot the idea down, I asked, "Does anyone have a better idea?" "Tunneling under?" Abigail threw out. I couldn't feel the entire formation on the walls, but I could tell it extends well into the ground. We'd have to go deep, and that would take weeks, and it might not even work, I said. We had enough supplies for a year, and taking that long on one city would eat into them quickly. Plus, we'd have to fight their earth mages for control, and they'd know exactly where we'd be coming up. It would be giving them the high ground and alerting them of where we were, Gabriel said. We could just wait until the siege weapons bring the wall down, a new voice said. Victoria had mostly watched as we went through ideas. There's no guarantee of that happening, I responded. We could attack all day and not bring them down. That's what the Heartlands tried to do in the south, and they didn't manage it. John and other earth mages were able to keep it together and even repair it during lulls. I doubted Smooth Rock would have someone on John's level to protect the wall for that long, but they could have something else. What's the harm in waiting? Sydney threw out there. She was eyeing the new ranger as well. While the stone throwers do their work, the sharpshooters can pick off whoever they can. A good enough power shot can take down any of the siege weapons mounted on the wall, too. I can't promise it will work, but it will do something and cost us nothing. Why am I rushing? It hadn't occurred to me that I was trying to hurry this process along until Sydney pointed it out. While I was trying to find Ryan, I highly doubted he was in Smooth Rock. We just needed to take the city so we could continue our search east. The same could be said of St. Marie and Shieldreach. If Ryan were to flee somewhere, it would either be his capital Ottawa or one of his other big cities like Montreal and Quebec. You're right. It doesn't cost us anything but time and supplies, but we can spare a few days sieging down the walls. We'll still build the towers as Plan B, I said. Anyone else? Everyone looked around and shook their head. Then I'll be in my tent if anyone needs me. With the plan set and the meeting concluded, I walked back over to where Sophia had set up my tent. The ice bed treasure didn't heal the spirit as well as it healed the body, but it was better than nothing. Plus, I could catch some shut-eye while everyone was preparing. I'd make the shield sometime tomorrow, just in case, but I was tired from the march here. Without my boosted endurance, I had to sleep a lot more than I was used to. The fact that I wasn't sleeping well had nothing to do with it. End of chapter 420.